in the first few minutes there. This is a South Carolina team that, again, we know they're locked in pretty much to the NCAA tournament. Even if they do lose these last couple games and get bounced from the SEC tournament, they're going to be in maybe as a 7 seed or whatever it may be. But we feel secure in saying that they're going to be in the NCAA tournament. Also, we feel secure in saying that they are a top 25 team, as they have been for roughly over the past month now. And, you know, it's really funny looking back for even going back to non-conference play, week in and week out, we were waiting. When are they going to be in the top 25? When are they going to be in the top 25? And maybe in a lot of people's opinions, they joined a week or two after. We thought that they maybe should have been in, but since then, they have been in there, even after losses to like Auburn and LSU. They still stayed in the top 25, and they come in yesterday at number 17, a one-spot jump from where they were a week before at number 18. So, again, this is a team locked in the tournament, perennial top 25 team, again, blowing out all the expectations of what anybody expected from them before the season.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, why was I going to call him? Lamont Paris. I saw, yesterday his comments going back to SEC Media Days, and he went really granular on that.
Right.
He really he came armed. He had statistics.
Oh, yeah.
Like, not a single team that was picked in any conference to finish last. He had, like, the average, he used some big word. I mean, he was ready to go.
He seems very calculated.
Very calculated. And I think he's used that as motivation for his guys, but I think they've also done a good job of kind of threading that needle and drawing the line between not letting it be a distraction. When they're not ranked as highly as they think they should be, when they are ranked and people are starting to show them love, but this team has really kind of been unflappable from that standpoint.
I like to imagine, was Media Day, was it in Nashville? Do you remember? Was Media Day for basketball in Nashville? Regardless of wherever it was, I just imagine that Lamont Paris is sitting at like the hotel looking in the mirror like, I'm going to show them. Think we're going to be 13th? All right. Get those numbers out. I mean, you pay for that. And obviously he's been able to do that this season with the amazing way that South Carolina has, has played so far. And again, in our opinion, should be Coach of the Year. I don't see anybody else that should take that crown. I think it was either you or Wes that brought up Dan Hurley from UConn. Sure, you can make a case for that, but I think what Lamont Paris has done here at South Carolina is truly remarkable, and hopefully, we have a deep run in the tournament to keep us engaged for, most of the month of March as well.
And I thought T3 Bracketology, I thought his comments on South Carolina, you can tell he really likes South Carolina.
Sure.
And would like for them to be even higher. I think Gamecock fans get, rightfully so, ticked off at the computers because the computers are computers and they don't really they're not sitting there yet. They're not sitting there watching basketball. They're looking at a bunch of numbers. And so there are some things for South Carolina that, and I thought he explained it well. If you're looking for an explanation of why does the computer, Kim Pom, BPI, why does ESPN have them losing every week? It just seems like the net rankings that are just, they're silly at this point. But why do they not value South Carolina as much? Well, you could say maybe the home losses to LSU and Georgia, maybe, but also not. They had an overtime win against Missouri and then a close win against Missouri. Mm-hmm. Things like that where you're not, people, you can roll your eyes and say, okay, well, what do they want them to do? Blow out, some small team by 40? The answer is yes. Frankly, for computers.
Sure.
But I do think it's kind of an exercise in futility to get too mad about that, because at the end of the day, this team's going to get a really good seed. That seed's going to be earned. Could you say, could be another spot higher? Yeah. But they're going to have every opportunity to go compete. They've put together, an amazing season. Just a fun team to watch for sure.
And again, up to 17th in the latest AP poll. On the women's side of things, here's a shock. South Carolina women still number one in the latest AP poll yesterday.
Can't believe it.
Wrapping up their undefeated regular season, second win in a row. And, as they get set for the SEC tournament, again, they won't be playing until Thursday at noon, getting the double bye there as the top seed. Got some very cool news yesterday in regards to next year's team. Tina Paopao, who, of course, transferred in from Oregon this past season, one of the best three-point shooters in the entire country, deciding that she's going to come back for another year next year.
Huge news. First of all, Paopao still leads the country in NCAA women's basketball for 3-point field goal percentage.
Mm-hmm.
She is hitting almost 49% of her threes, which is a remarkable number. And it's also not a number that's really skewed by, you took 50 threes in a season,
Mm-hmm.
right? She is still a decent volume shooter. She's not at the top of the country, but she's taken 140 threes in 28 games. Tyler, do you know who the leading field goal attempts taker in NCAA women's is?
It's Caitlin Clark.
It is. And the number is absolutely staggering. She has, by the way, Caitlin Clark, 39% on threes. She has taken 412 threes.
Good Lord.
The second in the country is Aaliyah Nye from Alabama with 240. So she has almost doubled up the person who is second in the NCAA in field goal attempts from three. So pretty amazing there. But yeah, Pau, I mean, look, I feel kind of about the women's team like I do the men, where we could sit here and go, that player is the straw that stirs the drink. That player is the X factor. But like the men's team, you never really know where it's going to come from on a given night.
Sure.
But I do think when you look at this team, probably the biggest difference between this season and last season is the outside shooting, right? Bree Hall is playing more this year than last year. She can certainly shoot the three-pointer. Raven Johnson is not going to be a great outside shooter, but she has added it to where she can be a threat. And then obviously Pau. I mean, that is the biggest difference if you look at the three-point shooting. That was the reason that, they played Iowa last year. Raven Johnson has the ball up top. Caitlin Clark sinks back to the free throw line and, waves her hand or whatever it was.
He's just like, do whatever you want to do.
Go ahead. This year, you can't do that. You can't do it to Raven, and you certainly can't do it to Pau because she needs a half chance to shoot the ball, and she's going to make it about half the time.
Yeah.
And that's been a huge part of this season's team.
And so, Pau's coming back. Cardoso, again, going to be a high pick in the WNBA draft. She's going to be gone. I believe Sakima Walker could also come back. I think she has at least one more year of eligibility, if I'm thinking correctly. But you think about what next year's team's going to be. And again, we still got plenty of basketball to play this year, and we hope they're close to a national championship, in a month's time. But you think about next year, you're going to have, like, Bree Hall's going to be a senior, Sanaya Fagan, Ashton Watkins going to be a junior, Kitts, Raven Johnson going to be going in their third years, Full Wiley coming back for a second year, Tessa Johnson coming back for another year. Like, the experience of this team is going to be tremendous going into next season. And again, no reason to think they're not, once again, going to be one of the best teams in the country. Well,
and then you add to that, Tyler, the fact that you've also got more freshmen coming in. So Adele Tack, who was technically in the 2024 class, already here, injured. She was a big-time recruit. She was a 5-star prospect. You also have Madison McDaniel, who's dealing with an injury right now, but she is one of the top point guards in the country out of Bishop McNamara in Maryland. And then, of course, another in-state big in Joyce Edwards, who by some metrics is the top player in the country. You're going to be adding her to the mix too.
Yep.
Now, obviously, Cardoso is a big loss. But last season, you lost your entire starting lineup, and look at the product you have now. Getting Pau back, I think, is huge because now you're not going, where's the shooting going to come from in the lead guard next year? Big news.
Absolutely. So the train will keep on rolling coming up next year as well. Again, hopefully wrapping up this year with a national championship in just about a month's time. Continue on the Garnet Trust Hour. Dive into the latest on NIL and the NCAA coming up here on The Game. Welcome back in. Garnet Stress Tower, Tyler Head, Chris Clark along with you on this Tuesday morning. We didn't get a chance to get into this. There's so much Gamecock stuff from over the weekend, but going into the weekend, some interesting news from the NIL front. Do you remember back, was it not even a year ago now, where the NCAA kind of almost put out this notice to the entire country that, hey, we're coming, we're investigating, we're going to be looking at all these schools, and we know you guys have been breaking the rules, and we're going to come down hard on you. They had the deal with Florida State a while back where, the situation with Amarius Mims and, the offensive coordinator driving him to meet with the collective on when he was attempting to potentially transfer there a couple years ago, and they're looking into Florida, and then they obviously ran into Tennessee. That led to the lawsuit that they lost last week in court to both Tennessee and Virginia. And on Friday, they said, we're going to be pausing our investigations for the time being, and that time being might end up being permanent because, once again, the NCAA takes a ding as far as the overall power goes with another loss in the courtroom.
Yeah, my question on this is, this all seems very silly now because that Florida State stuff, what was that, a month ago? Something
Maybe
like that?
2 months ago. It wasn't that long ago.
Time flies.
Yeah, sure.
Sometime this calendar year.
Yes, 2024.
Right, so it was no less than 3 months ago. And, that was not an insignificant penalty.
No, and in fact, it was what we kind of thought was setting the table for what the future penalties were going to be. Like, hey, they're going to make an example out of Florida State to deter everybody else from breaking these same rules. And it seemed like there was going to be more coming down the line. And again, you run into this Tennessee situation, it's gone the other direction.
And I can't remember if it was Darren Heitner, Mitt Winter, one of the very, plugged in attorneys on Twitter who talk about NIL all the time. And these guys have been, very involved in that in various capacities. And one of them pointed out, I can't properly credit who, hey, I wonder if Florida State is going to make a legal challenge now to these things. Like, you can't enforce these penalties.
Sure.
Look what's going on now. There's probably a really good case for that. It's kind of interesting that the NCAA even took that approach. Like, why they're wasting time on it? I think it's kind of, they've made several efforts to continue holding on to power, to continue holding on to the parts of this thing that they can. They're still making silly rules.
Yeah.
Hey, you can't do cookie cakes. You can't decorate rooms on official visits. Now, the funny thing is, how they always say, well, we're just doing what the schools want.
Sure.
Hey, honestly, there are probably a bunch of recruiting departments that are like, I'd be fine not doing the cookie cake and the decoration.
Right.
But I have a hard time believing that they're actively lobbying the NCAA. Please don't let them do this. I don't know. I really don't know the inside of it.
I think it's kind of more one of those situations because they had the rule change a while back about the photos being taken on visits and stuff like that. And look, there's obviously, a team dedicated photographer that has to do that job. And that's something that, does take up some time and take up resources as well. And I don't necessarily think it was the school saying, hey, we really need you to get rid of this, or we can't keep taking pictures of these recruits on these unofficial visits or whatever it was. But I think it's one of those things that when they came up with it, they're like, okay, that's cool. Yeah, we don't have to worry about that anymore. Like, I think it's more something along those lines than like them begging and pleading, please, we can't keep decorating these hotel rooms and making cookie cakes. They're running us dry. Like, I don't think it was necessarily that.
No. But, it's just, it's fascinating kind of this continuing power struggle. If I'm Florida State, look how Florida State handled all the ACC stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they were very much publicly.
They almost got the Saudi Public Investment Fund to help them out.
Yeah, I mean, they were very out there. And so I'm kind of surprised, and maybe it's been out there. I certainly haven't seen as much of it. I'm surprised there hasn't been more conversation about them publicly in the public sphere.
Right.
I'm sure there is in Tallahassee about fighting this thing. But here's where we are now. And you can blame whoever you want to blame. But the reality is that this does fall back on the NCAA for, if you want to sit there, like, call it the wild, whatever terminology you want to use, it is their fault mostly for not getting out in front of this and creating something. And Charlie Baker's come in. I think he's tried to do some things.
Sure.
but is so far gone. You know, we're so far down this path that it's tough to kind of dial things back and wind things back. But where we are now is, you know, for NIL collectives out there, there's still some rules that you got to work within technically, you know, but you can use NIL deals as an inducement now technically because anything that the NCAA has on the books, you know, they are not able to enforce those rules as of right now.
Yeah. Well, and that's what this kind of opens the door for is, you know, initially the original rules of the NIL is, hey, you're supposed to be on campus, you're supposed to be a member of the university and already, be on scholarship there before you can entertain any of these NIL opportunities, as opposed to what we knew that it was going to become. Everybody saw the writing on the wall that, it's going to become this pay-for-play type of thing where everybody's going to go out and seek the best deal and try and find where they can make the most money to go play at whatever respective schools. And, it was very much under the table, but we all knew it was happening. We're not naive. We weren't going to plug our ears and pretend like it wasn't happening, because it certainly was. And now it's just going to be allowed to be more out in the open, more in a public space, because again, you're affecting these athletes' abilities to maximize their value by telling them that, well, yeah, you can't really know what you're going to be able to earn until you get to the school. I've brought up the example that Auntie Staples from On3 used last week, the week before, when talking about this, that, if you have 3 jobs that you're choosing between and you can't know your starting salary until day one of whatever job you end up choosing, you choose job A, congratulations, you're making $30,000. Well, guess what? Job B was going to pay you $100,000. Like, that's information you should be able to know ahead of time. And again, that's the latest update here with the courts in reference to the NCAA, that now these athletes can say, hey, I'm picking between these 3 schools, which one's going to give me the best NIL opportunity, and that's where I'm going to go.
Yeah, and that is exactly basically what the judge in the Eastern District Court of Tennessee, they had the hearing, actually back in February, mid-February, hard to believe, Clifton Corker, he said, without the give and take of a free market, student athletes simply have no knowledge of their true NIL value, and this suppression and the lack of knowledge harms student athletes. And I can say, Tyler, like covering NIL, covering recruiting, those two things are frequently commingled nowadays. One thing that I've heard a lot while people are bashing kids, the kids are greedy, the kids are this, it's actually the agents that have done a lot of harm here. The agents, there are some great ones, but there are also some that have made things quite difficult. And, I think this honestly is going to help curtail that a bit, because if you've got an agent saying, I can get you this or that if you do this.
Right.
Well, now the kids, you can legally take it a step further, and you can actually talk to these collectives, whether it's the agent you've hired, whether it's yourself, whether it's your family, and you can actually find out here is what is actually on the table now. So,
right.
Again, now collectives, brands, whoever, you can talk to high school kids. Now, caveat, you can't participate in NIL as a high school kid unless it's in your state law, because you have to think, you might be ruled ineligible in your own state if you're actively, say, getting NIL dollars from a brand, a business, a collective. So you still have to do that. But now this just officially opens things up to where these conversations can take place. And I really don't see, if this is our model right now,
right,
which it is, I don't see why that's a bad thing. I think being able to have those conversations without a kid being ineligible or some collective or some school getting in trouble, again, these things a lot of times were happening, and where they weren't happening, a lot of times it made things even worse, because you're just having to go through all these different channels. Now you can have those conversations directly, again, until we get a new model.
Right.
And that's what Charlie Baker, the NCAA president, laid out in his letter announcing this.
Speaking of a new model, in the wake of this ruling, Tennessee is setting the table for what could be the future of NIL and payments to players. We'll talk about that as we wrap up today's edition of the Garnet Trust Hour. He's Chris Clark. I'm Tyler Head here on The Game. Welcome back in, Garnet Trust Hour. Tyler Head, Chris Clark, along with you. A few more minutes. Wes Mitchell jump in with us at the top of the hour for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. I want to wrap up our conversation in regards to the latest ruling with the NCAA and NIL that stemmed from the lawsuit brought forth by the Attorney Generals of both the state of Tennessee and the state of Virginia, which, again, both sides ended up winning in that regard. And in the fallout of this, Tennessee, at the end of last week, began a nonprofit fund through their university that is essentially setting the table should we ever get to the point where institutions are able to pay players directly, which it seems like getting closer to that, where Tennessee's kind of positioning themselves to be at the forefront of that movement whenever it does happen.
And, I think, Tyler, the word is that we are going to be talking with Mark Benoit and Jeremy Smith from Garnet Trust again, probably later this week, and maybe some others as well around USC. And this is something that I want to ask them to speak on a little bit, because if you look here in the state of South Carolina, the current bill that's going through the legislature, so this would apply, obviously, to the two big players in state, with South Carolina and Clemson. There is a lot of flexibility within this bill when you look at the provisions. And Mitt Winter, who I mentioned earlier, the very good attorney who talks every day about NIL, he pointed out, hey, my reading of this bill makes it seem like that schools could directly facilitate payments to student athletes for NIL. Now, to back up, I don't think you're going to see the University of South Carolina cutting a check to the starting quarterback. I don't think you'll see that. But what you can do is create, integrations between your collective and the university. That already happens somewhat, right? There's a partnership there. Garnet Trust is the official collective of the University of South Carolina. There's a partnership there. But you can take it a step further with this new state law once it passes, and the expectation is that it will.
Right. And I think it's easy for people to ask the question of, okay, well, if the schools end up, taking on the responsibility of making the payments to the athletes, what does that mean for these collectives? Are they still going to be around? Which they will be. I think it will kind of, in a way, revert NIL back to what its almost kind of intended purpose was going to be, where it's like, hey, you remember this university, you remember the school, here's your opportunity to earn something on the side and personal endorsements, that kind of stuff, but not be the driving force behind what funds your program, because that's the unfortunate part that we've gotten to now. And, where you have these coaches going to these, events and saying, hey, look, we really need you guys to step up, open up that pocketbook, break out that checkbook, because you need to help fund, bringing our athletes in here, which, again, a lot of schools have done a really good job at stepping up and bringing that money in, but that's not a sustainable model to continue on with however many more years in the future. If you have an opportunity for the athletes to be paid directly by the schools, and let's just set a baseline salary of $50,000 or whatever it may be, that means for all scholarship athletes, all 85 guys on the football roster making that $50,000 salary. Then, in addition to that, if you're the starting quarterback, if you're an important player, somebody that has that brand value to people around the community, you can add on those personal endorsements that do give you a little bit more money than what everybody's making. But again, it's not the sole amount of funding that you're getting for your program.
Yeah, it opens up some different possibilities. Right now, like, let's say if you're a member of a lot of collectives have similar setups. Some are, 501c3s where there's charitable causes built in. Some of them are membership platforms. Some of them have both, like Garnet Trust, right? And so for a membership platform, you get different things. Well, there's different levels to it. Your tax-deductible donations typically are bigger, right? Your membership program is typically smaller amounts, $10 a month, $25 a month. But a lot of fans are frustrated of, man, why are we having to do this? Like, college football makes tons of money. These schools make tons of money. And so as this type of thing, as it continues to go in this direction, you will see schools be able to take on more of the bill, I think. Now, is that still going to come with fans? From fans, yes. Sure. But, for instance, the Gamecock Club, IPTAY at Clemson, they could take some fan funding that they already get through dues,
right?
And then they can turn around and get, hey, if you If you jump in on NIL, you get some extra priority points, things like that. So there's an added benefit for people where they're not so, some people don't mind. Some people are feeling like, hey, I'm having to take $25 a month of my hard-earned money. I don't really get that much benefit other than possibly a better football team.
Right.
Some people are fine with that. Some people want a little bit more. So I think it's a positive because it potentially unlocks a new audience for you, and it puts more of the onus on the university to jump in and do it.
Absolutely. So something to keep an eye on as landscape of NIL and college sports continues to change. Jump into the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs coming up next right here on The Game.
All right, we're going to tell you about them before we jump into the GC Takeover Hour. Our friends at Firehouse Subs. Shout out Larry Chandler. Saw him over the weekend at the USC women's game with his family in tow. Great to see him. And, of course, we were talking about Firehouse Subs. Working, Tyler, by the way, on figuring out where our next Firehouse Subs on-location show is going to be this month, so I'm excited about that. One reason I'm excited, I'm going to get the chicken Parmesan meatball sub again. That thing is fantastic. Savory chicken meatballs, bright marinara, shaved Parmesan, melted provolone, and crispy Italian seasoned breadcrumbs, all on a toasted garlic bread roll. It's here for a limited time only. I don't even know when it's going to go away, so you better go get it soon if you haven't had it yet, or if you want to try it again for the second, third, fourth, fifth time, make sure you go get it. Easiest way to order, firehousesubs.com. Use the Rapid Rescue so it's waiting on you when you get there, or download the Firehouse Subs app. Get yourself some rewards on future purchases. firehousesubs.com.
11 o'clock on your Tuesday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you. We did originally have a plan for today's show. We're going to have Chance Miller in here with us today, the Senior Deputy Athletic Director for Gamecock Sports. Unfortunately, as he is a very busy man, did have something come up. We are going to work to try and get him in hopefully sometime later this week, but really look forward to whenever we get him in here, getting some of his insight on everything going on with the world of Gamecock Sports. But we certainly understand, other matters do come up with a job like that.
Maybe he's planning another soccer match or WNBA game.
We're just going to host the World Cup at Willie B. That's what it's going to be.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. Yeah, he's got a lot going on. Hopefully we'll get to catch up with him later this week. That would be cool. The background, I think, is fascinating on how they got that match. And then obviously it sold out like that. And just something that's really cool, not just for the university, but for the city and for the state as well. And I believe will be something that maybe can prove, hey, you can do stuff like that, and maybe will be kind of a blueprint for future, just kind of outside the box events on campus and in Columbia. And I've heard pretty solidly that this is not the first of similar things that they are trying to work towards doing. So I think. Will be cool to kind of hear the background on that from Chance. And, obviously hit on some other things from men's basketball and how just awesome this season has been. Obviously, women's basketball sets the standard. And then Chance very, very involved on the football side as well. So they'll be starting spring practice in 2 weeks. So I would say a timely visit if we can get Chance in here later this week.
What did those tickets for that game end up selling for, by the way?
Oh, on the pre-sale, I mean, I think uppers were like, let's put it this way, 5 tickets in like the uppers after everything would probably run you like $900.
It's not terrible.
Yeah, and then if you were down in the really good seats, you're talking, $400 or $500 a piece, things like that. So. But man, it was absolutely wild. Like I was actually on the pre-sale.
Yeah.
And we picked up some. We're gonna go. Picked up some for some friends and my wife and I. We're gonna go and looking forward to it. But the pre-sale was wild. I mean, they were getting scooped up just left and right. I don't think there was much left when they actually went quote unquote on sale to the public.
And we didn't take a deep dive into it when that got announced, the other week. Obviously talked about how cool of an opportunity that it was. I'll be very interested to see, because there's obviously a lot of local interest here, because getting to experience an English Premier League soccer game is something that doesn't typically come through South Carolina all that often. So a lot of local people that want to take part in it. But I'll be very interested to see what element of the European crowd decides to want to come over and see the States, see Columbia or whatever it may be, and kind of how that mix of an audience kind of comes together in that game.
Yeah, if you're looking to make a little side money, put your house on Airbnb that weekend, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
It's going to, it's going to be, I don't know, will it be as, probably not to this extent, but I kept being reminded of the eclipse when everybody just came to Columbia because that was the best viewing spot on the East Coast. That was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And
that was 17? Was that 17 when that happened?
Yeah. So 7 years ago. But that you just had people from all over hitting up Columbia. We saw something similar when the city was able to host the NCAA men's basketball tournament. Which I thought was really, really cool for this area. So it's a big deal, and I think just shows you if you think outside the box, there's things you can do, and there's an advantage in that, Columbia isn't Atlanta, but compared to a lot of college towns, it is a bigger area, especially when you add in all the Midlands and all the kind of surrounding areas. So there's some opportunities to do things like this that maybe you couldn't do if you were in more of a just true college town only. And I think for so many years, it was considered by a lot of people to be a negative, even that USC was in the city, and also that the stadium was not an on-campus football stadium.
Right.
And now I think you're seeing with all the different tailgating areas that are kind of being built up and all the just development around the stadium, hopefully much more to come there, you're seeing that you could possibly turn a big conceived negative into a positive.
Yeah, for sure. And again, this is a conversation we'll dive more into with Chance Miller, hopefully when we get him on a little bit later on this week. But, you bring up the possibility of different things that you can do here in Columbia at a place like Williams-Brice Stadium. When I think about, a lot of these cities that host big events like Atlanta with Mercedes-Benz Stadium where, and I brought up this point before, NFL stadiums are more than just football fields now. They're entertainment complexes that can host Final Fours and concerts and monster truck shows and all this kind of stuff that, can create year-round events. Well, a place like Williams-Brice Stadium being built for football, 100 some odd years ago, decades and decades ago, whatever it was, is more in line with being a single type of, not a single type of event use facility, but something that's not quite as wide open to bring in all kinds of events. So I'd be very interested to know, what is on the possibility of, bringing into a place like that outside of football, outside of soccer, maybe thinking outside of the sports bubble completely, that kind of type of things that you can do at a stadium like that.
Well, and you got CLA, which again, it's kind of considered to be a negative by some that it is a multi-use facility and not kind of like you see, what would you say, Auburn, which built a pretty new arena that's smaller, a little bit more just sports and basketball focused, and there's positives and negatives to everything. But I think with CLA, if I'm the city of Columbia and the university and everybody involved with that, I mean, I think it'd be awesome to see another push to host a round of the NCAA men's basketball tournament here. Like that to me, and for what I understand, hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, this was just what I heard, is it ultimately comes down to hotel space for stuff like that. And I think South Carolina was right on the bubble in terms of having it or not having it last time. I think that's a huge deciding factor with this stuff. But to me, that stuff is anything we're talking about here, whether it's bringing Asia Wilson and a WNBA team back for an exhibition or preseason game at CLA, you're just expanding, for one, the eyeballs that see your city and kind of see what it's all about. But for two, you're exposing people here. If you're Dylan Staley, you're trying to grow women's basketball, you're exposing people in the Midlands to the WNBA brand and to a different view of women's basketball. If you're the promoters for the soccer event, you're letting people in the Midlands who maybe would never see this high level of a soccer match in person, you're giving them that opportunity to go do so. So I think these things are no-brainers. It is just all about kind of being outside the box, and it's probably about being willing to be told no because, I mean, L.A., Philly, and Columbia are the three places that this thing's going to be at. So I imagine there are some people saying, hey, you're wasting your time even pursuing this.
Right.
But, Chance and everybody involved over there, they said, well, we're going to try anyway, and because of that, they were rewarded for it.
Yeah, there's so much you could do in that area. This is another thing we'll have to talk with Chance about, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but, they've got the big stadium project going on over there, right? So we're talking about what's going on in the stadium. We've seen big concerts there. We've got the Pope visited there a while back. We've got, this soccer match coming up. All those things are great, but now you start thinking about what they could do around that area. And then if you have that area, that goes to what you talked about, Wes, like hotel space. That's something that can go in and around that area as well, in addition to retail, all sorts of stuff that can help that area grow, bring in revenue, grow your city, grow your coffers, and then attract other high-level events, which, those types of things, recruits in football, recruits in basketball, they look at so many different things, but sometimes those things can give you an advantage for a certain type of kid, for the right kid. And if it does, great.
Well, I think it can be a boon for the city as well, and for your athletic department. If this thing generates the revenue that it seems like it might, then I think you want to talk about big picture, man, and NIL, and are the players going to be employees or revenue share, whatever that looks like, however they legally decide to verbally structure all this stuff. ultimately, you got to keep finding ways to grow the pie, I think, because the players are going to get their cut, I think, directly from the athletic department eventually, again, regardless of what that ends up actually structurally looking like. So, to me, you got to continue to think outside the box and finding ways to increase your own revenue. And really, what can you do to increase it in comparison to your opponents? Because if you're South Carolina, that SEC money, yeah, that's going to, SEC TV money, essentially is what it is, that helps you out a ton, right? Like that takes a good bit of pressure off of this. However, every team you play in conference is obviously getting that same check. So what can you do to differentiate yourself? What can you do to try, and especially if you're South Carolina, you're not the richest state in the world, what can you do to kind of, or the biggest state, what can you do to sort of think outside the box and create some kind of just different revenue streams and stuff like that? So this is obviously with the soccer, it's a one-off, but I think it maybe shows you what could be done in the future as you continue to think outside the box and just doing some things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we will try and get Chance Miller in here a little bit later on this week to dive into more details on all those things and everything going on around Gamecock athletics at this point in time. We'll get into a conversation about the changing landscape of college football as we get set for maybe more teams getting out of the playoff and maybe shifting around all the leagues once again in the very near future. Before we dive into that, though, I do have a pair of tickets right now for caller number 4 for tomorrow afternoon's baseball game taking on Davidson, 3 o'clock first pitch out at Founders Park. Caller number 4 right now, 803-404-6100. Again, 803-404-6100. Captain Dave standing by to take your call on that. More of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs coming up here on the game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you here on the game. Coming up tomorrow night, 6:30 pregame, 7 o'clock tip right here on the game. Big men's basketball game as South Carolina takes on Tennessee at Colonial Life Arena, looking to add another notch to their resume as they wrap up the regular season. They'll play Mississippi State coming up on Saturday. We haven't really dove into it too much on this show, but of course there's the proposals out there of the new college football playoff. We haven't even gotten in the season playing the 12-team playoff, and there's already a push for a 14-team playoff coming potentially in 2026 with automatic qualifiers from all the conferences, at least all the power conferences. And Paul Feinbaum yesterday was on our sister station, Jocks FM, talking to Cole Kublik and Greg McElroy, and was kind of talking about where he sees both the SEC and the Big Ten, who now have this collaboration, don't call it an alliance, with each other, and how they're kind of using this power within the future structure of the new college football playoff. Cut number 8 here, Dave.
To me, the most interesting part of all this is the fake outrage from the media. First of all, nothing has been determined yet, and many of the so-called top influence makers in our space are just going apoplectic and talking about the arrogance of it all. But what I think the SEC and the Big Ten are trying to do is set some parameters, and as if to say, listen, we have pretty much controlled this sport. We are bringing most of the eyeballs into the college football playoff every year, and will continue to. We want to be paid for it. So everyone listening knows that to set a baseline, you have to maybe overshoot the runway a little bit in negotiations. I don't know specifically what the goal is of Commissioner Sankey and Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, but I do know that they're probably tired, or I feel very strongly that they're probably tired of loudmouth presidents like the guy at Washington State who got in the way several years ago and stopped progress of the 12-team playoff. He viciously attacked the group that came up with it, including Greg Sankey, and he's still mouthing off. And he's part of a league with 2 schools. I mean, so my reaction to President Schultz is shut up. Go find yourself into a league before you try to dictate policy at the CFP. And there are other people like that as well. And I think when you look at the numbers, we know that the SEC has populated this tournament significantly since its inception. Nobody's even in the same category, but the Big Ten has had some representation. So I think that's what's really going on. And whatever they're putting on the table to scare everyone, they're probably saying, listen, if you don't like it, we'll take our ball and go somewhere else. And quite frankly, guys, that's a possibility.
And Paul brings up a good point there. Nothing's been finalized for this potential 14-team playoff that could happen as soon as 2026 when the new college football playoff contract basically starts. But the reporting that we've seen, the prevailing thought is that it will be something close to that, and potentially the SEC and the Big Ten could be looking at getting 3 automatic qualifiers themselves, the ACC and the Big 12 potentially getting 2 spots, and you can kind of fill in the rest, 1 group of 5 team, and the rest being at-large bids. And he brings up a good point there. When you look at the history of the college football playoff, most of the spots have been dominated by SEC and Big Ten teams. They've obviously won a majority of the titles, and with the exception of the 2 that Clemson won, all of the college football playoff national championships. So there's a sense in the room that they should get a larger piece of the pie, or they just go off and do something else on their own that we've kind of teased for a while that could potentially be on the horizon, but certainly something that we should hopefully know all the details of here, hopefully before the season starts.
When does this end? I think
it never does.
I mean, I know it never really ends. Like, you can go back, conference realignment and how we decide a champion and all these things. It's been changing for decades. Like, you can go back, college football now looks completely different than it did 10 years ago, but you go back 10, 15 years before that, it would have looked completely different than it did then as well. So I get it, but if I'm a fan, which I am, at some point I feel like you said, we're not even at the 12 yet, and we're already talking about 14. At some point, I'd like for there to be a little stability for at least a minute.
Right.
Like, I feel like fans are a little bit just tired of being beaten with headline after headline about what's the next big change for college athletics. So,
Gives us great content.
yeah, well, it does, but also I'm like, all right, if we're going to go to 14, let's just go ahead and go to 14. Why, let's just skip this step.
And it seems like 16 is the destination at the end of the day. So why
Well,
not
if
go
we're
ahead
going
and
to do
jump to
that, let's go ahead and go 16 then. But if, there's an interesting sort of, I don't know, battle within the battle here. I saw some talk about this on Twitter about, hey, if you're the ACC and you agree to take lesser guaranteed slots in a playoff, then you're kind of publicly admitting your lesser status.
Right.
It's always kind of the public perception has kind of been that, yeah, SEC, Big Ten rule the day. But officially, the ACC, you can always you can spin anything. And so to me, to admit that you're a lesser conference, that's a big deal. And two, what does that do for this potential ongoing legal battle between Florida State and the ACC?
By the way, they got a court hearing coming up. I think it's today, ACC Florida State. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. I saw Dan Wetzel from Yahoo Sports. He has a podcast with Pat Forty and Ross Dellinger, our guy, Wes, who we've never met, but I very much admire. Would like to meet him one day.
I got a man crush on Ross.
He made the argument, Dan did, and Dan's phenomenal, that, the current forthcoming expansion, not the second potential expansion, but this expansion of the playoff, these automatic bids for the ACC, given that they are weaker, given that they've admitted they're weaker, obviously, might be a win for them, right? I think so, possibly. Because you got a bunch of different schools of thoughts. Like I saw Pat Forty in the same podcast was saying, Big Ten, the SEC are bullying people around. Yes, they are, clearly. Because now you're starting to see, and look, some of the stuff that's starting to be written about like a super league, some of this stuff has gotten out to reporters like Ross Dellinger,
Sure.
Some of the other national guys, because, and I'm not saying it's Greg Sankey, but, people around the league, people who know things in the Big Ten and the SEC are certainly putting some of that out there because the Big Ten and the SEC are kind of putting people on notice. Hey, if y'all want to stay as part of this model, cool, you can come, you can play along, that's cute, that's nice, but we're running the show here. We're going to be making the most money. We're going to get the most everything. Everything's going to benefit us the most. And if it doesn't, cool, y'all go do your own thing, and we'll go do, our Super League or whatever. And then maybe if you play nice enough, you can get an invite to the Super League that we're starting. So they have position. We've been talking about this for a couple years, too, how these two conferences were really, really positioning themselves long-term to be in the best shape, and it's kind of played out that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, something that's going to continue to evolve and something that we're going to continue to have to talk about because it's changing, seemingly every single day. And, hopefully, again, we'll at least maybe know the fate of the future of the college football playoff before this season even starts. So the speculation won't have to run for the next couple of years. Chris has told us he has a make your case ready to go, and he has given us absolutely no details on it. So we'll dive into that coming up. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
All right, guys, continuing to welcome our newest sponsor here on the show. It's our friends at Classic Roofing. Head on over to classicroofingsc.com today for information on their services and for a free estimate. They are offering residential and commercial roofing services throughout Columbia, South Carolina, and the surrounding areas. My friends Joe Reeder and Max Sawyer, they have a wealth of experience spanning more than 20 years in the roofing game, and their team of experts, well, they're well-equipped to handle any and all of your roofing requirements. Taking care of your roof, it can be a difficult job, so you're going to want to have the experts come out and help you do just that. Get them to come out for a free estimate. And then what you can do from there is have an idea of, hey, I need to fix this now. I need to fix this in 2 years. Or guess what? Maybe my roof has got 10 years left on it, and I don't have anything to think about right now. Call them today. Set that up, 803-590-7870, or just go over to classicroofingsc.com to set up that free estimate.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, West Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you on this Tuesday morning. Another reminder, go online to 1075thegame.com, register for your chance to win the Palmetto Citizens Federal Credit Union Grand Slam giveaway. $25 gets added to the pot for each and every baseball game this season. And when a Gamecock hitter does hit a Grand Slam, you could be the lucky recipient of however much money is in that pot. Again, go online to 1075thegame.com to register. Game coming up today as they take on the Citadel at 6:30. Pregame coverage will start right here on the game at 6:15. All right, Chris, the floor is yours. You've not given us any information on this for your make your case.
Are we going to play the cool noise?
Dave, can we get that?
Dave is already on it. Thank you, Dave. All right. Tyler, this one is not as fair to you.
Oh, boy.
Well, there's no problem. You just don't. You might not have as much context, but you may surprise me because you are a sports historian.
Okay.
All right. We're going to let Wes go first, though.
Okay.
All right. 2023-24 South Carolina men's basketball program is generally slated as a 6 seed. That's where our guy T3 has them. That's where some others have them. The thought is that they'll probably, all things considered, land as a 6 or a 7 seed. They're playing in the tournament. They're safe. That's fun. The 2016-17 South Carolina men's basketball team was a 7 seed, the worst in history, according to Matt Jones of Kentucky Sports Radio. And, of course, that program went on to make the Final Four. So here's a question. Wes, you're going to compare the two teams. Make your case. After the regular season, which team was better?
Chris, come on. Good grief. After the do you have the regular season for men's basketball in front of you?
The records?
Yes.
I'll give you the records.
Yeah, you got to help us with some data here, Chris.
So that team was 12 and the 2016-17 team. They were 12-6 in the SEC. 26-11. So they're 25-9, 11-7 in SEC play. Finished in a 3-way tie for third place that year. And then this year's team, of course, currently 24-5 and 12-4 in the SEC. And they have not finished the regular season. So just base it on what you've seen so far. Wes, we didn't cover that team closely. We followed that team closely back then. Of course, the Final Four run was unexpected. That was a really good team as well during the regular season.
Yeah, it was. So are we saying, like, if these two teams in their prime just
you can
laced it up,
If they went head to head, who wins?
You can go at it however you want.
or we're going resume, or I can do whatever I
You can
want.
pick whatever you want. That's the fun part about it.
Yeah, you know what, guys? I'm gonna be a prisoner of the moment right now. This is one of the best. I mean, I don't remember those 90s teams that were, like, really good too. This is the best regular season so far that I can remember myself personally watching. And so I just look at what this team has done consistently this season.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the fact that we can sit here and talk about, their worst losses are, man, you shouldn't have lost that lead against Georgia. You shouldn't have lost that lead against LSU. Two SEC teams. Like, the fact that they went through that 9-conference slate and were still finding themselves, were still gelling together. CMB wasn't himself yet, because of having to deal with mono, and it was almost an entirely new team, yet they still found ways to win games early, and they've just steadily gotten better and better and better. I mean, because of the question being regular season, I got to go with this current group. I mean, I would probably take Sindarius Thornwell over any one player.
Yeah.
Especially with a game on the line. I think Sin was the best player on either team.
I'm there. I can buy that.
Sin was so special, man. And he there was talent around him. Let's not pretend there wasn't. But he helped, like, he took those guys and pulled them to the finish line, I think, during what was one of the most special runs in school history in any sport. So not downing that, but I think where we are right now, to be where they are, to be in a position where you're playing for the SEC championship with 2 games left.
Mm-hmm.
You've only lost 5 games all year long. I mean, let's call it what it is. This is a special season. This team has earned the right for the modern South Carolina basketball the last 10 years to say they've had the best regular season to this point.
And that team did, by the way, for some reason I got the numbers wrong. That 25-9 was the season before. They're 26-11, 12-6 in the SEC. That's where they finished up. They beat, I do remember there was an early warning that that team could have been really good. You remember they beat Michigan by 15, who was ranked. They beat a ranked Syracuse team by 14. At the same time, they lost 4 of their last 6 regular season games in the SEC. They lost to Alabama in the quarterfinals, one and done in the SEC tournament in Nashville. And, of course, they went on to make the Final Four. And, of course, some of the names that team had, it reminds me of this team, and that's why I wanted to compare them. They don't have maybe a bunch of superstars, but they had some guys who were NBA level players or like fringe NBA players who were just really good. PJ Dozier, Dwayne Notice, who was your like classic 3-and-D player, super underrated. You had Gravitt, you had Raheem Felder, Justin Mackey, you had Kotsar Chris Silva. So you had some depth there and some guys that had a lot of different, skill sets, I think.
Yeah, and we've kind of had this conversation with our listeners, as this regular season has gone along, kind of comparing them to that 2017 team. And the sentiment I get from a lot of people is that, and, going back to the comment from the KSR guy about, South Carolina being the worst 7 seed in, history or whatever it was up to that point, in his opinion, that I don't know if there was this strong belief that team was going to be able to go on the run that they did, which obviously they did, and that's amazing. But I don't think anybody necessarily believed that at the end of the regular season. And where we sit now with the South Carolina team, again, still 2 more games to go against a good Tennessee team and a good Mississippi State team to wrap up the regular season. I think there is a belief that if this team went on a sizable run in the NCAA tournament, I don't think anybody would sit here and say they were shocked by it necessarily, because they've shown the ability to beat every kind of opponent so far this season. And what, you were kind of talking about there for a second ago, Chris, that, they're not a team that's driven by one superstar player. And if that player's not doing well, then everybody else, can't step up. And again, Michi Johnson's had his ups and downs. He was the best player at the beginning of the year, but his season's been a little bit of a roller coaster. Obviously played super well these past 2 games, but other guys have stepped up. We've had different guys step up and being the leading scorer on a night-in, night-out basis, and that's kind of, the story of what this team is. As you mentioned, that they're not, just kind of driven by one guy. And kind of looking back to some of the numbers from that 2017 team, yes, they had several key players on that team, but I'm looking and Sedarius Thornwell was routinely the leading scorer on that team on a night-in, night-out basis. There are a few different ones here and there, but I don't think they were quite the sum of their whole parts is what this team is, which, again, I think gives them the ability to, like I said, beat anybody at any time, which hopefully translates well into the tournament.
Yeah, and I'll say this. With the construct of Chris's question, it's fairly easy for me to go towards this team right now, but I don't want to in any way let people forget how special it was the way that team played in the tournament. Like, you want to talk about being greater than the sum of their parts. Like, this was a team that was clicking on every single level. From you got Thornwell at his absolute best. He was the leading scorer for South Carolina in all of their wins in the tournament. So their first 4 games, he was the leading scorer. And, it's easy to forget. So this team, the team in 2017, they were where – there was a point in that season where they are where this team was. They were 9-1 in SEC play and 19-4 overall, and were a 4 overtime loss to Alabama, in which Thornwell went for 44-21 at CLA. They were a 4 overtime loss away from being 20-4 and 10-1 in SEC play, and played 10 straight top 25 teams. So the reason people weren't expecting greatness out of them in the tournament was because they were sitting there 10-2. They lost that Alabama game, then they won at Mississippi State, who was number 19. They were 10-2 and 20-5. So they were in a great position, but then they lost 3 straight, then 1-2, then lost 2 straight to end the season. So they stacked a bunch of losses at the end, and people were assuming they were running out of gas. And instead of letting the bad momentum continue, they took a couple of days off, they reset their legs, they got fresh, and then they were actually the team we saw for most of that season. So if this year's team laced it up with that year's team, it's going to be an all-out war, man. Like, I'm not ready to say this team would definitely win. I just think this year's team's regular season is just so consistent.
Yeah, very consistent. And, you know, that team, the previous team that we're talking about, I think they were built so well for the tournament because you had a guy in Thornwell who could take things over from a scoring standpoint. You had the stopper and notice. P.J. Dozier began to play his best basketball of the year at the exact right time. You had Silva, you had Kotsar. There were just so many different pieces there, and everybody seemed to peak at the right time. I'm having a really hard time with them. Of course, we have different biases here. We have the recency bias, the prisoner of the moment of seeing what we've just seen. We haven't seen anything this good in quite a while. And then we have the bias of knowing that team made the Final Four. Like, we have the finished product of that team, right? I do think if you compare them after the regular seasons, and again, this year's team has not completed the regular season. They're close. I think you go with this year's team. That other team might be built a little bit better for the postseason. Now, again, bias because we know, yeah, they made the Final Four. But even just trying to look at it objectively and trying to block that out of my mind, I think they were maybe even a little bit better built for the postseason, although this year's team is certainly built for it as well, in my opinion.
Absolutely. We'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. As we head into this break, though, I do have one more pair of tickets for tomorrow's game. Baseball taking on Davidson, 3 o'clock first pitch out at Founders Park. Caller number 5, 803-404-6100. We talked yesterday a little bit about athletes opting into the EA Sports video game. Well, there's one notable one that's opting out. We'll talk about that next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you for a few more minutes before jumping into the halftime show with myself and Terry Ford, who is back in today. This news coming out last night, we talked yesterday, very excitedly so, that roughly around 90% of eligible athletes for the new EA Sports College Football video game have opted in to the game so far. And again, we've heard about this process, basically like this app you download, you put in your personal information, and you eventually end up getting your $600 and a free copy of the game when it does end up coming out. And sounded like just about everybody was going to be included in this until last night. Texas redshirt quarterback Arch Manning has decided to not opt in to the EA Sports College Football 25 video game. Arch is focused on playing football on the field instead. Is it really that big of a distraction to put in some personal information? 5 minutes tops, right? Like, I don't see how this is taking away from what you're doing. They're not even starting spring practice yet.
This is no fun. And let me preface it by saying, obviously, it's every player's choice whether they go in the game or not.
Sure.
So don't pop back with the argument of, well, it's his choice. Obviously, it's his choice.
Yes.
However, don't tell me that the reason, and Arch himself hasn't said this yet, this is based on reporting from Anwar Richardson, who's very good at what he does from my experience. The reasoning is that he wants to just focus on football.
On the field.
Yeah, not in the virtual world. Don't tell me something and then give me that as the reason, because it makes no sense. What's the actual reason for this? Because otherwise, and I'm going to still and credit J.D. Piquel here, he tweeted, which I agree 100% with, love how Arch has kept it all about ball since he was a high school recruit. But is it not a bigger story now that he is opting out than if he had just chosen to opt in?
Yeah.
So you're pretending, oh, no, this is just about ball. I'm going to just keep it about my team and real football. No, you're now a story because you opted out. So you're actually doing the absolute opposite of keeping it about football, as opposed to just going in the game like 95% of your teammates.
Well, and I don't know what the media availability is for Texas football players, but let's just assume that maybe he gets to talk to the media around spring practice or something like that. I guarantee he's going to get asked 3 or 4 questions about this specifically, as opposed to what's happening on the field. Again, the thing that he theoretically is trying to focus on.
Streisand effect. Completely backfired. That's when you try to hide or censor something and then just completely backfires. That's exactly what this is. It's so to your question, Wes, what is the real reason? I think, to me, is it possible that he looked at that and said, I just want to focus on ball? I mean, I guess. I don't think so. That's a silly reason to me, because it's not like you're sitting there every time somebody logs onto the game, you don't have to go play.
Right.
The computer does it for you, your little character. So if there is another reason, what is it? Well, we've heard some other players are getting higher dollar amounts to do it. Mm-hmm. He's also, his camp, quote unquote, has consistently said he's not worried about NIL.
Sure.
He supposedly didn't take NIL deals in high school until we got to Texas.
From a good family.
So, that maybe that's not it. Maybe not getting offered more money. Could it be what Colton Denning has put on Twitter, that the Manning family saw the 71 overall rating and said, no, we're not going there?
You will not disrespect us in this game.
That's a nice conspiracy theory.
I like that. That's what I love, that conspiracy theory.
Well, and here's the thing. For people that are playing this upcoming season, more people are probably going to be using Quinn Ewers as opposed to Arch Manning anyway. So I don't know how much run he would be getting in the game, and I guess they'll take whatever the third string quarterback is and just elevate him to second string, or use a generic fill-in for number 16 on the roster.
That's my question. So can they use QB number 16? Because couldn't the players now say, that's me, that's my likeness?
From what I've read, it's going to be very generic on the guy, because they don't want to get in the same position they were in before.
That's right.
And two, you're not going to be able to create Arch Manning. Like, they're going to, on the back end of the game, create a way for you not to be able to create real people. somebody had a great tweet. It was like, I guess Texas transfer quarterback March Anning will not be winning a national title at Kennesaw State.
That's right. Hootie hoo. Yeah, so I guess backup quarterback number 2, Joe Smith from California at 5'8" and 120 pounds or something like that.
They should give everybody who opts out a terrible rating.
That's right.
Be real petty about it.
Because we know who that's supposed to be,
yes.
right? Like John Dowd taking the place of Barry Bonds in the old baseball video games.
He was a beast, though, in
He
those
was
games.
a beast. That's right. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show coming up with myself, Terry Ford, right here on The Game.